Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples Integrated Recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice and sugarcoating, no platitudes or bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. I have written a couple of articles and done a couple of podcasts on chasing red flag partners and the why do I do some of what I do, or am I attracted to what I'm attracted to? And this is something that comes up semi-frequently. I'd say maybe somewhere around a quarter of the clients that I work with in person, and that was what inspired today's episode about novelty and attraction and sex drive and being chosen. So with that, if you have dated in the last 10 years, then you're probably familiar with a handful of the apps that exist. Tinder, Bumble, I don't even know, Match, probably a half dozen that are related to sex. And with those, you get the notification or a message from somebody that you barely know, and your attention lights up. Maybe you double check the profile or triple check the profile, and then you notice something happens in your body, like a surge of energy or excitement or curiosity or anticipation. And moments like this are easy to label as immediate attraction or chemistry, but underneath that moment, the brain is registering something that is probably older, related to development, and potentially more powerful. Of course, I can't speak for everybody, but I'm going to just talk about some general themes that I see in the office. Someone chose you, and that signal can carry enormous psychological weight because the nervous system treats it as evidence about desirability, status, and worth, and maybe even a update to an internal scoreboard. For some people, that lands with unusual intensity because the excitement feels bigger than it really should, and if you look closely, it's often related to something that's earlier in life. Many people who experience strong pulls towards sexual novelty share a similar early environment, and often it's some variant of a childhood or adolescence that placed them somewhere near the bottom of social hierarchy. Maybe they were the chubby kid or socially awkward kid. Maybe you had Coke bottle glasses, last picked in gym class. Maybe the one who got laughed at during a middle school dance, or that you were watching your friends dance and you were the one that was on the bleachers alone eating your Snickers. The one who watched everybody else pair off while you were picking your nose or pretending that you didn't care. And these moments organize identity a lot more than people think. Children track status constantly, and they notice who gets chosen, who gets attention, who gets ignored, and that hierarchy can become internalized whether they vocalize it or not. The brain starts forming a quiet narrative: people don't pick me. And once that narrative is formed, it can sit there for years or decades waiting for any contradictory evidence. Fast forward into adulthood, bodies change, confidence grows. Maybe now you've had some Botox, or you are a CEO of a company, or you earned a degree, or you do whatever, and your social skill improves, and now maybe people are more attractive. Somebody wants to sleep with you, somebody flirts with you or sends you a message, somebody chooses you. And let's strip any morality from this, of whatever a religious overtone might look like. The nervous system reacts strongly to that because it's bigger than sex. It's about a correction to that old ranking system that your brain had crystallized. The brain reads it as proof that the childhood hierarchy may have been wrong. And this is where dopamine is part of the equation, because dopamine responds strongly to what neuroscientists call reward prediction error. Think about that as an example I can remember from a grad school textbook was if you went to a candy dispensary, like this THC, dispenser, like a bubblegum machine, and you put a quarter in and a bubblegum comes down, brain says reward, yay, bubblegum, right? If it were to release 2 of those, though, then your brain would code that as extra important, like, holy shit, we put a quarter in, but 2 pieces of gum came. So that is a reward prediction error. When something better than what was expected happens and the system lights up. For someone who believed that they were undesirable, then being sexually chosen can produce that exact same signal. The brain registers, hey, my old prediction was probably wrong, and maybe I was wrong about status. And sexual novelty can intensify this loop where a new partner recreates that moment of uncertainty. Each encounter then becomes a new test of desirability. Does this person choose me? And if the answer is yes, then the dopamine system will flood that person, and another point goes on the scoreboard, another piece of evidence that the old social ranking no longer applies. Over time, the brain can start to associate sexual novelty with psychological repair, even though those are not the same thing. And all of this, of course, is unconscious. Most people would never articulate it that way, but the reinforcement loop in their brain forms anyway. And then sex can become a vehicle for collecting evidence of worth. This is something that is very common in gay culture, and there are several books that are written about this. One that comes to mind is The Velvet Rage. Alan Downs talks about how many gay men grow up absorbing shame around being different, especially in environments where masculinity is policed or approval from fathers or male peers is conditional. And that early experience can create a deep sensitivity to social ranking and acceptance. And then as adults, attention, sexual desire, and admiration can start to function as proof that the old judgment about being inadequate was wrong. In that, he talks about like validation through achievement or appearance or sexual attraction, and how being desired can carry emotional weight way beyond that physical interaction because it just quietly, temporarily interrupts that shame narrative that the person is living in. However, this does not only apply to gay people. I see plenty of heterosexual men where this is also something that comes up with their relationships. And sex can become a vehicle for collecting evidence of worth. But what can become very interesting is what happens if people enter a stable relationship. Long-term partners can end up caring, desiring, and choosing you, yet for whatever reason the nervous system reacts differently. The outcome is already known, the uncertainty disappears, you're not getting the 2 pieces of bubblegum with 1 quarter, and with that, dopamine and oxytocin are less. And some people interpret that change as a loss of attraction, or maybe faded or poor chemistry, or in some cases, the mechanism is simpler, that the brain has already metabolized like the answer, do I feel chosen? And it's yes. and then you're not searching for proof. But this is why novelty sometimes carries a stronger emotional charge than stability, because novelty recreates the moment where the verdict has not been decided. So think of it kind of like mentally, your body recreates being that kid in gym class of, am I going to be chosen on this team or not? Of course, you're not thinking that when you're like half naked, waiting to have sex with somebody, or waiting on an app to find out if somebody's going to answer you. But this is what's going on at a nervous system level, searching for proof. There's another layer beyond the schoolyard or gym class story too that can also involve family dynamics. Many people who experience powerful drives around sexual validation grew up around a father who was emotionally absent, critical, or constantly corrective. In some homes, a father was physically present but psychologically unavailable. Maybe work-dominated attention or alcohol-dominated evenings. And with that, a child rarely receives the affirmation that they need, or approval felt conditional or rare. In other homes, maybe a father was present but really harsh, and a boy who was too sensitive or artistic or socially awkward received constant correction that they were too soft or too weird, or boys aren't supposed to be in plays, you're supposed to be playing football. Too emotional, too different, don't play the clarinet. And something that I've seen for gay men is often a situation where masculinity was policed aggressively by a father or a male role. So maybe a father who senses a difference in their son reacts with ridicule or distance or relentless attempts to reshape a child. Like my partner had shared a sad moment or a painful memory from childhood of just eating dinner with the family and his stepfather grabbing his hand and like forcing it into his face, like, hold it like a man, goddammit. And kids receive a clear message. Something about me is wrong. I'm broken. I'm different. And they don't argue with that message. It's not like kids know how to challenge their own thoughts, so they just absorb it. The father figure then sits as the top authority or hierarchy in their life, and approval can function like oxygen to a developing identity. When approval is withheld or replaced with criticism, then the child starts scanning the world for any other source of validation that they can get. Adolescence arrives, sexual development begins. Suddenly, the possibility appears that somebody might choose you, that somebody might want you, someone might value you where previously you saw a deficiency. And again, try to pull any, I keep thinking of my mom shaking her head. Try to pull any religious language out of this. And what we're talking about is a moment that carries serious emotional weight. It sets the stage for reinforcement loops that will show up in adult sexuality because the system has been primed for validation through desire. Sexual attention becomes evidence that all of those early rejections were maybe mistaken, and that pattern is understandable. It grows out of a nervous system's desperate attempts to repair early injuries around belonging, worth, or status. But for the people who don't make their way to therapy, then that repair strategy often includes alcohol, pornography, compulsive sexual novelty, and any other unstable thing that you can think of that quietly for a moment just resets the nervous system. Once the nervous system links sexual attraction with identity repair, the reinforcement cycle can become very powerful because the brain starts using moments of attraction as evidence that that earlier judgment was maybe wrong. And it creates a feedback system where every new partner then becomes another trial or another test or another opportunity to prove that you're still worthy or that you are worthy and that the old hierarchy no longer applies. This mechanism explains why novelty sometimes carries such intensity, because each encounter temporarily quiets a past voice that was formed earlier in life that said you are not desirable, or you're too awkward, or you're inadequate, or you're unwanted. And for a moment, that verdict internally changes. Somebody chose me. And that relief can feel enormous, but rarely lasts long. The reason is simple, because the scoreboard resets. The nervous system adapts, and the evidence fades into the background, and then the old uncertainty creeps back in. The brain starts to ask the same question over and over again. Am I still desirable? And that question drives repetition. The system starts scanning for the next opportunity to confirm my worth. And for young adults, maybe alcohol enters the picture around this point. It reduces inhibition, it amplifies reward sensitivity, and it makes novelty even easier to pursue and easier to justify, because the person who once felt socially displaced suddenly experiences environments where validation flows very easily. Everybody at the bar is kind of happy, or everyone at the party is kind of dancing or being sexually provocative. Dating apps, sexual spaces, and desirability becomes currency. Or I have a handful of clients that are seen for pornography addictions, and that can also serve as a similar regulatory function. It offers immediate dopamine that is tied to sexual imagery and novelty without the risk of rejection. And for someone who's carrying early wounds around being chosen, then porn can be a quick way to activate those same reward circuits in the brain. Over time, behavior can start to escalate, that they need more novelty, more intensity. The old stuff that they used to masturbate to doesn't do it the same way, and more stimulation becomes required to recreate that original signal. But the core driver often remains the same, a nervous system that learned early on that desire from others equals proof of worth. And so, again, this is where father dynamics re-enter the story, because this is not a gay thing. I see plenty of straight men who have been screwed up by their emotionally unavailable boomer fathers. Children build internal sense of value through early attachment figures, and often that is a father role, and it can shape how young men interpret competence, masculinity, and belonging. And if the father relationship is either absent or carries criticism, distance, or contempt, then a child often internalizes those judgments. The voice becomes internal. You're not enough. You're not strong enough. You're not masculine enough. You're not the kind of son that I wanted. You're not the kind of man that women would be attracted to. And for the boys that later realize they're gay, the tension can become even more intense. A father who expected a traditional masculine trajectory might react with disappointment or rejection when their kid diverges from that path. Sometimes the message is explicit, but sometimes it arrives through sarcasm, silence, or just relentless correction. Either way, the kid absorbs the meaning, something about me is unacceptable. And that message does not disappear when adulthood begins. It becomes the background noise of the nervous system, and an adult version of that child keeps searching for counter evidence that they are worthy. Sexual validation can be a quick, clear way to gather that evidence, because if somebody else says that they are attracted, then maybe I'm not defective. If someone desires me intensely, maybe all those other judgments were wrong. And maybe if enough people choose me, then I'm finally worth enough. You can see how this can turn into a recipe for instability because the system keeps chasing external confirmation for an internal wound. Each success brings temporary relief, followed by more uncertainty. Alcohol magnifies this pattern, porn amplifies it, dating apps accelerate it, and that reinforcement loop just goes faster and faster. Now, some people may go to a 12-step meeting where this serves as evidence of addiction, or they will put that label on it. I do that because I'm alcoholic. I do that because I'm a sex addict. But this is what's underneath all of that for most people with those kind of wounds. The nervous system has learned to regulate distress through repeated dopamine spikes that are tied to sexual novelty. And understanding the mechanism changes how that problem looks. So this, I just recently did a podcast about being 4 groups and 4 12-step programs, but here's where I'm going to critique them, that I think that they can oversimplify complex problems by slapping a Band-Aid on something that goes, oh, well, I do that because I'm an alcoholic. No, that's why you stay in meetings for the rest of your life, is because you don't look at the wound underneath all of that. The behavior often reflects an early attachment injury that's combined with a status wound. And a child who once felt invisible, rejected, or inadequate, it makes sense that then adult sexuality becomes the arena where their identity is rewritten. The nervous system thinks that it's still updating a scoreboard. And once somebody recognizes that mechanism, then the situation can begin to shift. The urge for novelty can become more understandable. This isn't about just being an alcoholic or just being a sex addict or whatever. The impulse can start to look like a familiar attempt to answer an old question about worth, but your awareness alone doesn't eliminate the problem. I've said in a handful of podcasts, clients say, I just want to get to the root. Well, there's the root, but that doesn't change the programming. Your reward system learned those associations through years of repetition. Neural pathways were strengthened with a lot of practice or a lot of doing, arguably the wrong thing. And change usually involves learning to separate your sexual attraction from validation seeking. Those motivations feel similar in the body. Both create excitement and anticipation. The difference sits underneath the surface. One arises from genuine desire for connection or erotic exploration, and the other arises from an old scoreboard asking for another point. The moment that a person begins to notice which system is active, the behavior becomes easier to understand, a pause becomes possible, reflection becomes possible. The old narrative about worth loses some authority. At that point, the work shifts from chasing evidence of being chosen towards building a deeper internal sense of worth that doesn't require constant confirmation from somebody else. And a process like that takes a lot of time. Early hierarchy wounds and father dynamics run deep. They shaped identity during the years when the brain was still forming its core maps of belonging. Yet, the insight itself is powerful. If someone can see this loop clearly, childhood displacement, paternal criticism, sexual novelty, dopamine reinforcement, then the mystery dissolves, and what once felt like a random compulsion begins to look like a predictable pattern created by a nervous system's attempt to heal an old injury. And once that pattern is visible, then a different path of doing the work becomes possible. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we are all capable of growing past them. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there. And in the meantime, thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.